Hey everybody, Michael Snyder here, West Coast Weather Watch. Today is August 10th here, and I just thought I'd go over the latest El Nino information that came out. We are still in an El Nino advisory, not technically an El Nino just yet. We have to remain that way for 5 straight 3-month running totals here as we go on in through the summer, fall, and winter months here, but we're almost certainly going to be considered an El Nino. If we look into some of the text here, you can see tropical atmospheric anomalies were consistent with El Nino, so they're starting to show up. We've kind of been going this flip-flop thing here of showing some basically a La Nina hanging around for a bit here, but things are starting to switch as we get some of those anomalies starting to be consistent with El Nino coming up here. More on that here in a moment, but you can see the probabilities. We are basically in El Nino conditions as we speak, and almost certainly going to be in an El Nino as we head through the fall and the winter months and on into next spring as well coming up. Now this is looking at the Southern Oscillation Index. It's another way to measure things here, and let's scroll all the way back to July 2020 here, and you can see we went to positive territory there and we stayed there. Check it out, all the way through 2021, all the way through 2022, positive territory. And if you've been paying attention, you know that we've been in a La Nina the last 3 seasons, so you know this positive correlates with La Nina conditions. Now you can see by May 2023 we dropped down in negative territory here, and we had a bit of a pause here during June here, but now headed back down into negative territory, which means El Nino is likely here to stay for a while, at least the next several months in through the winter and into spring here as we continue to move further into negative territory. Now, what does this index mean here? One more look at the data here, and you can clearly see the downward trend as we go towards negative territory here. It means lower pressure over Tahiti versus Darwin, Australia, and it gives us a good look at what's known as the Walker circulation as it goes on across the Pacific Ocean, especially the equatorial regions here. So here is Tahiti and here's Darwin here. During a La Nina, you can see the pressure is higher here over Tahiti, and then you see during El Nino it's lower, which means the circulation, the lower pressure is now moving out over the Pacific Ocean here. So a nice visual diagram there. And as we look at the Walker circulation itself during El Nino, you can see as it moves out across some of the central Pacific near the date line here, the lower pressure is here in El Nino versus La Nina, where the warmer water is out across the western Pacific and you get the lower pressure there. So that's the big importance between the pressure difference between Tahiti and Darwin, Australia. This is looking at 200 millibar way up in the atmosphere, and the green shading is favorable for precipitation, and you can kind of see that over the last few months. It's not been consistent the entire way through here, but for the most part here we're favorable for precipitation. That means that Walker circulation is now extending out over the Pacific Ocean here, and that shows up in the outgoing long wave radiation here. The blue means more clouds, and you can see that starting to emerge here across the date line there over the equatorial Pacific Ocean here as we go on in towards August, shown there at the bottom. And this is kind of a scrolling timeline, starts about mid-February at the top here. You can see the suppression of any kind of precipitation or clouds there across a lot of the central Pacific, and now we've kind of flipped as El Nino's been developing. This is looking at Kelvin waves. So you can clearly see when we're in La Nina territory here last fall, and then these consecutive Kelvin waves keep coming through here and gradually been warming things up here. We went through a bit of a pause here, but not unusual during the development of an El Nino as we continue to warm things up across much of the equatorial Pacific, the eastern equatorial Pacific. This is looking at the sea surface temperatures here again, and you can see things are still kind of above average as you go across some of the maritime continent out here as well. So it's kind of an interesting El Nino setup. We'll have to watch how this goes. It's going to be interesting to see the circulation with the ocean warmth across the planet. Very warm here overall. So it's going to be interesting to see how this El Nino develops and really who gets the biggest impact for it. It'll be interesting to watch day by day as we go through the fall and winter months coming up here. Now, this is looking at the Walker circulation for La Nina. And again, if it goes out over the equatorial Pacific here, further off towards the date line and eventually starting to make its way on into the eastern Pacific Ocean here, that's El Nino. So that's the big difference between the circulation between La Nina and El Nino. And when you bring all this moisture up into the atmosphere and this heat, it can change the entire system across the Rossby waves, moving across the jet stream, across the entire planet. So that's why El Nino is so important. And this is showing you the sea surface temperature anomalies. We're going through about mid-July here towards about August 9th, and you can clearly see the warm tongue extending off the coast of South America across the equatorial Pacific. Kind of a classic El Nino signature there, even though we are still fairly warm here across some of the Western Pacific, relatively speaking anyway. We'll see how that develops over the next few months. This is looking at sea surface temperature anomaly. You can see the climb as we've been just entering El Nino conditions there way back in May. And you can see the slow but steady climb kind of bouncing around, a little bit of, some variability here as we go. But the overall trend is upward there. And I know a lot of people like this one here. This is kind of the moving diagram here. You can see January, mid-January at the top here versus July 9th. And this is off the coast of South America. You can see the plot down here, South America, maritime continent. There's Africa, equatorial Pacific would be here. We're measuring the sea surface temperatures there. Now you can see La Nina now in our rear view mirror and on its way out, of course, in the very warm waters off the coast of South America and the general warming across the El Nino conditions there as we scroll all the way through August 7th when this ends here. So yeah, interesting stuff there, kind of a nice visual diagram. But anyway, just thought you guys would get a little bit of an update here on what the Climate Prediction Center has released today. We'll continue to watch this here as we go through the fall and winter months. Hope you guys are liking these videos. Check back daily, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow.